Hello and welcome to another episode of Climate Watch. I'm Zhou Fang, pseudonym for Feifei. China and the European Union established a climate change partnership 2 decades ago. They issued the Joint Declaration on Climate Change in 2005. It includes cooperation and dialogue on clean energy to promote sustainable development. At the end of 2013, the two sides jointly formulated the China-EU 2020 Strategic Agenda for Cooperation. This initiative aims to actively address global climate change, improve environmental quality, and enhance collaboration in green industries. In this episode, I spoke with Wu Changhua, a leading Chinese expert on China-EU green cooperation. She's the president of the Global Climate Academy and chair of the Governing Council of the Asia-Pacific Water Forum. We mainly talked about how China and the EU have transformed their partnership from early solar and wind collaborations to today's integrated strategies on carbon markets, circular economies, and more. The two sides also regularly engage in activities through high-level meetings, such as the China-EU High-Level Environment and Climate Dialogue. At the just-concluded 6th China-EU High-Level Environment and Climate Dialogue held in Beijing, Chinese Vice Premier Ding Xuexiang and EU Executive Vice President Teresa Ribera reiterated the importance of reducing emissions. The two sides said they will cooperate towards COP30, or the 30th Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which will take place in Brazil at the end of this year. Wu, along with other experts, attended roundtable discussions with Ribera. She also shared her exclusive first-hand insights from the roundtable discussions and key takeaways during our interview. Ms. Wu, thank you for joining us. Welcome to Climate Watch. The topic of this episode is China-EU green cooperation. Talking about China-EU green cooperation, I think I'll have to mention clean energy first because, clean energy has been one of the key areas of China-EU cooperation in addressing climate change. I think it can date back to 2005. So what major achievements have China and the EU made in clean energy cooperation over the decades?
Okay, thank you very much for hosting me on this program, and I'm delighted to join this conversation. EU-China definitely have been working very, very closely in the last couple of decades in particular, along the line of advancing clean energy transition. As we all know, clean energy transition is a crucial part of the solution to mitigate climate change. And that requires a technology, requires industrial value chain, it requires products and services, and very importantly, we need to deploy all those solutions possible in reality in order to accelerate the solution to tackle climate change. And in that context, and as you mentioned, so even back in around 2005, bilaterally, the two largest economies in the world decided to join up efforts on a few fronts, actually. At the global front, of course, we need to deploy clean energy to mitigate climate change. But also, even from both economies' perspective, actually, we do need to figure out, clean energy, renewable energy solutions in particular, how to build up the value chain and get the products and the market deployment together as quickly as possible. There are a few things actually to look at what has been achieved. One, China definitely has benefited tremendously from working with European partners, particularly if you look at the renewable energy and the solar, wind, you name it. Particularly from policy perspective, because feed-in tariffs, was a very, very important policy instrument, to incentivize investment in technologies like solar, wind technologies, and incentivize, leverage other financial resources, particularly from private sector, to invest in those technologies and turn the solar and the wind energy into technology into products and solutions. So that's a very, very typical example And the second part, actually, as I mentioned, the policy incentives are key. EU started to deploy a market-based instrument, something called emissions trading system, ETS. And so getting into the second decade of the century, China decided also actually to embrace more market-based instruments. So around the early 2011, 2012, 2013, even myself, actually, as a professional, I was closely involved in terms of facilitating bilateral discussion, and the collaboration. We do need to learn more from EU, particularly this ETS. And so EU took this initiative and really working very closely with the Chinese counterparts to support China to get the market-based instrument off the ground, starting with the capacity building, sharing experiences, lessons learned through their own, experience and practices there, literally helping China to build up the market-based instruments, not only policy landscape, but also the architecture. We call it a sort of industry in a way, a sector, because in order to deploy effective policy instrument like ETS, it requires of laws, regulations, policy incentives, but it also requires like institutional capacities, right? And including professional capacity there as well. So around 2013, I think as evidenced by the fact EU-China started to work very, very closely through the bilateral, partnership. In particular, EU sending lots of expertise, experience to China, bring Chinese counterparts actually to EU, literally build up the capacity. At the third level, we started to see industrial level collaborations there. Not only European companies actually investing in China. Last few years in particular, we started to see more Chinese companies investing in Europe. So on the practical level, the two largest economies have already been working with each other to like investment, industrial value chain markets, you name it actually, to start really further accelerating the deployment of clean energy agenda. And if you look at the EU actually, I think by the first half, just half of this year, already achieved 50% of their electricity coming from renewable energy. China definitely has been demonstrating another level of leadership, leading the global pace in terms of deploy clean energy. But if you look at the numbers, actually, besides the solar, wind, of course, that's already very well known, and also, adding into that landscape by batteries, EVs, energy storage, you name it. So the two largest economies are already leading the global clean energy transition there. There are lots of progresses made so far. There are challenges we had to face. There are lots of level of details, particularly with the emerging issues like, now we call it energy security.
Mm-hmm. So, let's delve into some details maybe a little bit later. So it seems that you have talked about how China and the EU have deepened their green cooperation. In 2020, the China-EU Green Partnership was established. It formally incorporated green transition into the core of the bilateral comprehensive strategic partnership. So, in what ways have China and the EU expanded and deepened their green cooperation in recent years? Maybe you can talk more about this.
Sure, definitely. I think, earlier we mentioned actually, if we put a timeline into this sort of review, so 2005 marked a new starting point, and 15 years later, of course, running to 2020, we learned a lot in that process. We achieved a lot, and of course, we have experienced lessons there. So 2020, EU-China launched a new stage, a new phase of bilateral partnerships, as you mentioned there already. In that context, actually, we started to see a few things. One, clean energy definitely continues to be a big part of the agenda, because globally we have to fight climate change, and climate is changing. And with the commitment of Paris Agreement back in 2015, we all committed actually to this carbon neutrality by around the middle of the century. And EU, China, among many others, actually have all committed to specific targets there. In that context, climate mitigation definitely is so critical there's a sense of crisis or a sense of emergency. So clean energy continued to be part of it. But in the meantime, actually built upon the learning experiences, achievements, lessons before. So there are a few things expanding now. One, I sort of mentioned actually the market-based instrument, and sort of started in 2013. China has already moved forward actually deploying the market-based instrument, which we call like ETS. We started to go beyond the capacity building, build up the institutional governance structure there, but really getting into the mood of implementation, right? So July 16th, 2021, China officially kicked off, the emissions trading scheme in the country. So the market-based instrument, the ETS, definitely is a major part of the element in policy instrument in that context as well. Besides that, we started to see circular economy, being well embraced into this bilateral partnerships, and because we all recognize it's important the circularity of resources, we need to overcome the resource constraining factor there as well. Besides, we all realize actually, in order to even advance the clean energy transition, that requires a lot of materials, critical minerals, raw materials, stuff like that. So that's very, very critical element. And then also, we started to look into the financing instruments. So we've been sort of learning and sharing bilaterally in terms of how to put the financing, sort of the regulatory context incentives together in order to accelerate the mobilization of financial resources to invest in, clean energy, circularity, the clean revolution, literally. And so circularity, the two, so on the EU side, they do have this sort of green, taxonomy, and China started to embrace that, really started to align with the EU approaches and methodologies there, so to make sure we build a more common ground. Rather than just each of us actually goes a separate way. So synergy alignment actually has become a very, very important feature of the new stage of EU-China bilateral partnerships there. And also actually we started to see something we call like from rhetoric to more action, mostly because we've learned so much. Also because the policy incentives on both sides have definitely played a big role in terms of really accelerating the development of, clean technologies, a clean industrial revolution, clean products and the services there. And so, from 2020 to now, 5 years passed already. I think we definitely witnessed the more achievements and the progresses there. So even more solid foundation laid on the ground already for EU-China to continue to work more closely together, really more solution-oriented, and also continued joint leadership for further accelerated clean revolution.
Very impressive achievements. 2020 marked the new stage of China-EU green cooperation. Of course, clean energy still remained to be a very important part of this cooperation because the two sides can build on the achievements and experiences in the past few decades. And also you mentioned the market-based instrument. But I would like to talk more about clean energy a little bit. Actually before our interview, I read a report about the recent 2025 European Smart Energy Expo in Germany. The report says China ranked as the second largest participant after Germany. Some companies showcased innovative products and technologies in solar PV and energy storage. And these products, of course, attracted numerous visitors and potential partners. Besides solar and wind power companies, some other Chinese new energy companies are also expanding overseas. For instance, CATL has built battery factories in Germany, Hungary, and Spain. BYD has established a battery assembly plant in Hungary. These companies cover different sectors in the new energy field. How have Chinese new energy companies contributed to Europe's green transition?
Actually, the Expo in Germany you mentioned, so that has become a new normal. And that's really reflecting the continued leadership and the milestones by Chinese investment in accelerating clean energy transformation and also clean industrial revolution. You also mentioned you started to see more Chinese companies actually investing in Europe. That's also normal in a way because the market is out there. It's a competitive market. When Chinese companies, many Chinese leadership companies have invested in innovation, developed products, and really demonstrating their competitiveness. Great, quality of product, great designs, and fit in, the market in EU. Why not, right? So, CATL, BYD, XPeng, Xiaomi, among others. Actually, there are many companies already investing in Europe's clean energy landscape, and particularly, I think, in Central East European there as well, besides Southern Europe, Western Europe there, and really started to become important player, part of the Europeans' clean energy transition, clean energy security agenda, and so we all need to celebrate that. But in the meantime, actually, we all know many European companies have been investing in Chinese market, not only just now, ever since China opened up, in the early, 1980s there. If you look at the FDIs, European, FDIs to China have been really, occupying a big part of it. The European companies also contributed tremendously to China's sort of growth economic agenda here as well. So from that perspective, I do think we should see, the current sort of status, more Chinese clean energy industries actually investing in European market and becoming local stakeholders, contributing to, the strategic agenda in this particular context, actually clean energy transition, clean energy security. That's pretty much normal. We definitely want to see more, right? We want to see more Chinese investment to Europe. Not only the market, but also invest in, build up the local supply chains, value chains, and invest in local job creations and provide more livelihoods to citizens actually in Europe. That's pretty much normal, right? We just need to do more basically to make sure support each other, benefiting each other. That's pretty much the normal collaboration and partnership of the two largest economies.
Mm-hmm. This kind of cooperation and contribution is really bilateral. I mean, it's not just one way, it's two-way, right? It's bilateral. So we've been talking about quite a few Chinese new energy companies have successfully established their presence in European countries. They export new energy products. They make investments and even build factories. So I guess each side has its own advantages, although they may be at different development stages. How do China and Europe complement each other with their own advantages in green cooperation?
As evidenced by the real market activities there. So in an overarching sort of way to describe the situation, Europe definitely is very, very strong experience in terms of regulatory incentives. And because they've taken sustainability, decarbonization, circularity to the core of their policy, sort of agenda, now even, clean energy, clean industry sort of agenda there as well, plus digitalization, of course, there as well. So they're really good at, with a proven record in terms of putting regulations together to really make sure to deliver their sustainability agenda, but in the meantime, really to incentivize investment and the industrial activities, the products deployment actually aligned with that sort of policy agenda there as well. Now, from China's side, I think China has made a very, very strong case to the rest of the world. So by far, we're really good at, the scaling part, actually, the scale. It's very competitive, right? The largest developing economies there, we build very, very strong industrialization capabilities there. We are quick in terms of, embracing the new development, the new advanced technologies there. and then we can quickly build up industrial value chains, supply chains, and turning clean technologies into products at a very cost competitive sort of a level. And one argument we all know, even say in the context of addressing climate change, a major part of the complaint, before 2015, particularly looking at the Copenhagen 2009, the COP, around that time, solar, wind, clean energy are too expensive, right? And so you just look at using the time frame, look at it between 2009 Copenhagen COP, COP 15 to 2015, the Paris Agreement, the COP 2021. The narrative was literally turned around at a global multilateral sort of governance mechanism. Why? Because China made a very, very strong case that clean energy technology in particular could become cheaper, more affordable, more accessible, and that's well known, right? And that's also a major contribution from China, not only through the bilateral lens, but also at the global level, basically because we're all committed to Paris Agreement. We need to, fight climate change, and we need to find solutions at a cost-effective way. And that's sort of putting that in the bilateral lens, basically, that's part of the Chinese strength, capabilities there. And that's sort of proven. That's why it becomes so competitive. That's why actually Chinese, companies will be able to really participate very actively in the EU, marketplace.
In recent years, I think the EU had to diversify its energy supplies due to the changing global landscape to address its energy crisis. So let's talk about energy security a little bit more. What benefits has China-EU green cooperation brought to Europe's energy security?
Well, I think one thing is very, very clear, as we're talking about it here. The reality shows that Chinese clean energy companies' investments have already become a very important part of the clean energy security, clean energy transition in European market. That's a given at this moment. Now, the tough situation now in the context against the backdrop of increasing complexity of geopolitical situation, geoeconomic situation. So we started to see, the climate agenda, sustainability agenda somehow being pushed not aside to a certain extent, to a large extent, depending on where we're talking about, rather really getting to the center of the stage are issues like energy security, supply chain security. Now, of course, with AI security is there as well. And then you start to see this, we call it, ecological security somehow is only there, but really pretty much on the sideline at this moment. It's not an easy, question to answer, honestly. And because how do we define energy security, right? It's not universally defined at all. It's defined by a lot of complicated factors, including geopolitical, geoeconomic rivalry there as well. So at this moment, the EU, thinking at this moment around the security, dimension is pretty much focused on the dependencies on, right? Particularly say, well, we don't want to depend too much on one single country, right? In this particular case of clean energy, I think from Chinese perspective, we need to take it as normal. We need to understand that because that's a similar situation for China. China doesn't want to depend on one single country for one particular thing for a long time, because what if, this big what if factors there. So that's why it's a security threat. If your dependency on one particular country, particular stakeholder there, that's tricky, that's risky. So we need to manage that. But we do need to negotiate and discuss with each other to make sure we understand each other, basically saying, okay, how do you define your security, right? If you look at what's happening in Europe now, in the clean energy landscape there, it's not just the deployment, installation of solar, wind, stuff like that, but rather it's about critical materials, right? About investment, about market share.
We've been talking about how the two sides have been cooperating, lots of achievements in the past decades. Despite the cooperation of Chinese enterprises in EU countries, the EU wants to reduce its dependence on imports, particularly from one single country, right? Yeah. So actually in 2024, the EU's Critical Raw Materials Act officially came into effect. So how has this act impacted Chinese companies? With the impacts, what measures should Chinese companies take?
As we're talking about it here, and the Critical Raw Material Act, on the EU side, is one important instrument, policy instrument, actually, to enhance their so-called energy security, literally to reduce, too much dependence on one particular country. And so the way they did, as I said, they want to put some boundaries there, right? The draw some lines there in terms of the percentage, right? Raw materials coming from China. And in that context, actually, it's not just a simple number, sort of whatever the percentage to control, to set the bar or cap. But more importantly, it's really about the supply chain security issue there as well. Now, this is a complicated story in a way because, at this moment, China's leadership, China is literally dominating this is sort of in the clean energy material supply chain landscape there. Of course, on one side, we all celebrate actually China's achievements. We all, the global community needs to appreciate China's efforts and achievements, particularly put in the context of clean energy revolution as well as fighting climate change. But in the meantime, that definitely has posed a so-called security threat to many countries, at least mentally, psychologically there. And of course, bilaterally, they will continue to negotiate. So that's not in anyone's, single individual's hand there at all. Now, what's the impact so far? That definitely created more hurdle for Chinese companies investing in European countries, particularly those leading ones. And because they're already very, very competitive, they have great products, their costs are very competitive, and they really want to participate more actually in EU clean energy market there. But somehow they're constrained. For companies, and it's very simple. When factors like that regarded as hurdles, what does that mean? That means more risk. So more uncertainty. Investors actually are very sort of smart in a way. It's normal. When there's more risk, that's going to really put them in a hesitant position in terms of making decisions. Because for investment private sector companies, they really mostly care about the two things. One is risk, the other one is return. If somehow with all the policy changes, transition policy changes, whatever you name it, and they see the risk rising, and they see actually the rising risk uncertainty will impact their returns, and they wouldn't really make any investment because this is not charity, right? This is a market. This is a competition there. So yes, impact is real. We definitely started to see more hesitation, much slowed pace in terms of Chinese investment in European market there. Now, back to the bilateral front there. That's so important actually. The two largest economies keep the channels open, the doors open, make sure they discuss, negotiate more with each other. At the root of the situation is a trust deficit. But somehow that's why back to the bilateral EU-China bilateral official channels become so critical. As witnessed this week, the bilateral high-level environmental climate dialogue is a good example actually to do that. But in the meantime, we also recognize only the official channel won't be adequate. We need to open up more channels to create more dialogues, communication, working together, partnerships, at a capacity building, industry level, research level, even talent expertise level, with a core agenda. Basically, through exchanges, through working together, we'll be able to somehow, if not totally, actually, reduce the trust deficit situation, but somehow at least actually mitigate the trust deficit, because we all know, we talk about collaboration partnerships, we all know it's so important, but without the trust as the solid foundation, we will not be able to travel very far at all.
Dialogue and communication and trust is really important. You attended the roundtable discussions with the Vice President of the European Commission, right?
Yeah.
Teresa Ribera. Did you guys touch upon anything related to this?
Pretty much so, actually. So I had the honor to be invited as, one of the 5 non-governmental, leaders from China to attend this more like closed-the-door, small-scale, round the table with Her Excellency, is the Executive Vice President of European Commission, Teresa Ribera, and her team there as well. Of course, she has been here for the 6th bilateral high-level environment and climate dialogue, particularly focusing on the climate and climate change issues, focusing on circularity and the energy agenda there as well. The conversation in that room, I can share very, very frankly, the tone is very positive. I'm delighted and convinced the positivity of green partnership between the 2 largest economies through Her Excellency Teresa Ribera, and also actually the way she also listened, right? And the reason why they created that sort of setting, because that's before the official bilateral dialogues. She really wanted to hear directly from different sources of voice, particularly non-governmental voices there. I can assure you, we pretty much, the conversation in that room basically say, we need to sides to work very, very close together, particularly in the backdrop of current, the situation with the U.S., the tariffs, whatever, the biggest uncertainty risk. Then, of course, we touched upon some of the key elements already, which is sort of we talked about here today as well. If you look at a clean energy, partnership, if you look at a circularity, if you look at a climate finance, as well as at the industrial level, right? And companies, we have European companies like Mercedes-Benz and others in China, and then Chinese companies actually to European markets there as well. Besides, and also we're talking about digital solutions, transparency, as well as accountability. I think will continue to be a very important part of the solution to help overcome the trust deficit issues there. And then I followed very closely, the dialogues and the conversations, through the official process. I can tell you very honestly, I definitely see, Her Excellency Teresa Ribera delivered her agenda in a very positive way, in a very collaborative, honoring the bilateral partnerships actually for the clean energy, climate, as well as circularity there as well. So we seem to be on a good track, positive track. But in the meantime, as we're talking about here today, there are critical issues, sensitive issues. The 2 sides had to continue to work with each other around the critical mineral, issues there, around actually the CBAM,
Yes,
the
right.
tariffs.
That's the first half of my discussions with Wu Changhua on how China and the EU have been expanding and deepening green cooperation in the past 2 decades. In the next half, we'll dive deeper into China-EU cooperation on carbon market, green finance standard alignment, and the role of the upcoming COP30 in advancing green cooperation between the 2 sides.